Well, welcome, friends. It is good to see you all. Today is my favorite medieval woman. I have spent more than a decade of my life working on her. Her name is Hrosvit. Can everyone say that with me? Hrosvit. And she is from Gandersheim. Gandersheim, yeah, so we're very German today. Hrosvit of Gandersheim. She is a 10th century canoness in the monastic community of Gandersheim, which is in modern day Saxony. She is the first Christian playwright that we have, and she left behind a corpus of 20 works that we're going to talk about today. She is fantastic. But before we do that, definitely want to review a little bit about where we have been. So we've now covered 4/6, 5, depending on who we count, women, Perpetua and Felicitas, Thecla, Radegund, and Bridget. Which of these has been the most impactful for you so far? And it could just be because you happen to be here that week, which is totally fine. Radegund's story was the most, yeah. Very compelling. Intense. That's our adjective for Radegund, yes.
The Bridget was interesting because it was most recent.
Yes.
Because you said she might not even exist.
Indeed, yes. She is the least historically solid evidence for her existence. The rest definitely did. So, yeah, she's the best. I'm a big fan of all of them. And they all have, if you had to tie them together, kind of what's the thread so far in terms of the way they represent Christian ideals in their various time periods? And we've really only covered about 300 years in Christian history, starting with the 2nd and 3rd century, all the way up to the 5th. So what kind of virtues, perhaps, did they exemplify? Devotion, absolute devotion. Self-sacrifice, enormous self-sacrifice on behalf of the first three in particular. Mom? What? Generosity, yes, absolutely, both in terms of actual charity, in terms of hospitality, in terms of interventions on behalf of slaves or political prisoners, or in Bridget's case, somebody being prosecuted for accidentally killing a fox, which was a bummer for her. Yep, absolutely. And one of the things that I think ties all of them together too is that they managed to exemplify all of these Christian virtues while still maintaining their identity as women. There's no confusion here that these are kings or soldiers or any particular kind of virtue that you might associate with masculinity necessarily. But instead, their virtues embrace and lift up what it means to be a woman in each of these time periods. And that, to me, is some of the most impactful part. So in order to, I am a historian, we have to keep with the maps and the history. So this is around 650, so this would have been when Radegund was, a little bit after Radegund was operating. The Frankish kingdoms here is where Radegund would have lived with the Merovingians, which were the names of the Frankish kings at that time. Bridget would have been all the way over here, up in Ireland, hanging out. And what I want you to see here as well is that there are lots of smaller kingdoms around and outside the Frankish kingdoms. The Merovingians, as I told you, if you think of anything about the Merovingians, you should remember that they were messy. They were very messy. Multiple wives, multiple sons, no primogeniture. It was chaos, absolute chaos. And you'll see here when we'll move that way. Somehow, however, the Frankish kingdoms managed to solidify their borders and become even more of a significant geopolitical player up and against the Umayyad Caliphate, which has now expanded all the way from Asia Minor through North Africa and all the way through to Spain. So how did the Franks manage to figure out what it meant to be a real player in the political game? And the answer to that question, of course, is Charlemagne. How many of you have heard of Charlemagne? Ha, all right, see, hidden names we know. Charlemagne is actually a combination of the Latin name Carolus Magnus, which means Charles the Great. He was the son of Pepin and brother to Carloman, who very gratefully died before there was any infighting between those two brothers. He is the first to consolidate kingship in the Frankish kingdom beyond the Merovingian line. So the way he did that is by operating as, members of his family operated as the palace mayor, the major domo for the Merovingian kings. So the Merovingian kings, the dynasty before the Carolingians, was sort of slowly losing power and authority. And as that power waned, the power of the Carolingians, who served as basically the prime ministers for the Merovingians, grew proportionally. So the Merovingians became kings in name only, and the Carolingians started to really wield authority in significant ways. One of the ways that Charlemagne sort of consolidated that authority was to move away from the Merovingian mode of being, which was an itinerant capital. The Merovingians didn't have a stable capital. They just moved around all around the kingdom all the time, which has some benefits. You get eyes on a lot of things. People host you, so you're not paying for a lot. Just be a guest at other people's houses over and over and over again. But for Charlemagne, it was important to have a stable capital, and he creates that stable capital at Aachen, and he undertook some really, really vast military campaigns, particularly against the Saxons that are in northern Germany. Charlemagne also figured out that in order to have a stable empire, and the Frankish kingdoms were inching towards the word empire, I would say, he had to standardize a lot of things. And he had to standardize a lot of things about what it meant to be a Christian, not just what it meant to be a member of the Frankish kingdom. And as a part of this, he standardized canon law. He standardized monastic orders. Everyone in a monastic order is now required to follow Benedict's rule. There's no diversity in the types of rules you can follow. He mandated a particular set of liturgy and liturgical prayers. So everyone in every church, all over the Frankish kingdoms, are saying the same prayers. He also cultivated this intellectual center at Aachen. He brought in thinkers and teachers and preachers from all over Christendom, and I do use that word on purpose. At this point, we're starting to see the Frankish kingdom be Christianity vis-a-vis an Islamic other. And as part of this, the Carolingian kings, particularly Charlemagne, enter into an alliance with the papacy. It's called the Franco-Papal Alliance, which is really fun. I hope that comes up for you sometime this week in the grocery store line. You can say, have you heard of the Franco-Papal Alliance? To the person behind you at Kroger. The Franco-Papal Alliance was essentially the popes agreed to crown Charlemagne as king of the Franks. And in return, Charlemagne defended papal territory against the Visigoths and some other Vandals and some folks that were around Italy. So you can see here the beginnings of this symbiotic relationship. What does Charlemagne get by being crowned by the Pope? Why is that a value add for him? Power. Yes, power, and specifically speaking, sort of divine power. So this is, the divine right of kings is something that we've seen throughout European history. This is the first time for the Franks that is made explicit. Charlemagne is God's representative on earth, having been crowned by the Pope to be the king of the Franks. And it's pretty obvious the popes get some military protection in return, which is, very nice. And for those of you who were here last year, when I talked about Christian nationalism and the dangers of Christian nationalism in my foundering class last year, this is the beginning of several points in Western European history where Christianity becomes really closely tied to political identity. And the ideological significance of the Franks becoming a Christian nation vis-a-vis a non-Christian other, particularly speaking the Muslims. It is Charles Martel, not Charles the Great, Charles Martel the Hammer, who defeats the Muslims at Tours in 734, that begins the beginning of this international narrative of the Franks as the Christians, defending Christianity, Christendom, over and against an Islamic other. And we'll see this in Protzvit's writings too. This starts to become part of what it means to be Christian in Western Europe at this time. And I will just point out, happy to talk about this is from my other class, but really, really important, contemporary Christian nationalists point to particular historical moments as emblematic of Christianity triumphing over evil, usually a non-Christian other. And this is the assault rifle used by the New Zealand terrorist who killed 70 folks in New Zealand, all at mosques. And you'll see down here right by the trigger, Tour 732. The time at which Charles Martel defeats the Muslims coming in from Spain. We'll also see a number of other historical moments, obviously from Hitler and other points, but to say that this historical moment is significant and has led to a lot of rhetoric that continues to this day. It's the same rhetoric that led to the Crusades, and that's a different story, but have lots of thoughts about that. So, but we're here to talk about Grootsveit, so I'm going to stick to the message. So this is the Carolingian genealogy. Charlemagne, of course, is at the top. He has one son who outlives two other sons, which is extremely fortunate for Louis the Pious, because again, no primogeniture. So Charlemagne's son, Louis the Pious, continues on a lot of the reforming and standardizing practice that we know from Charlemagne. He is called the Pious for a reason, very invested in organizing church culture, creating rules around monastic identity and liturgical practice. So very invested in that. Not so much a soldier, which is problematic later on, because he has 3 sons, none of whom have the good grace to either die or enter a monastery in enough time to prevent civil war. So when we talk about civil war in the Carolingians, many people think it's Charlemagne's sons. It's not. It's Charlemagne's grandsons, Lothar, Louis the German, and Charles the Bald. So Louis the Pious knows this is going to happen, so he tries to create something called the Ordinatio Imperii in 817, which essentially is reinstating primogeniture. He's like, sons, we're going to give everything over here to Lothar, and you're all going to be fine. However, when Louis the Pious dies, that does not happen. That does not happen. And in fact, it's not until 30 years later, after continued civil war amongst those 3 sons, that they end up with the Treaty of Verdun in 843, which subdivides the Frankish kingdom into 3 smaller kingdoms, each of which has a particular cultural tie to one of the brothers. So you'll see, for example, Louis the German, obviously, is the one who receives this portion, because that's Germany, that's where he's from, primarily speaking. In general, do you think subdividing a kingdom is a good plan or a bad plan? It's generally a bad plan for a lot of good reasons. It basically splits national identity. It splits national resources. It sort of reinvigorates cultural differences amongst the different areas of what had been a united kingdom. And all of this division is not helped at all by the fact that this is a period of significant violence outside of the Carolingian kingdoms. The pink is all the incursions of the Magyars, which are another steppe people from modern-day Russia. We also have the orange, which is our friends, the Vikings. The Vikings. And coming from both Scandinavia and all kinds of other regions. We talked about how they hit up Britain pretty extensively. One of the things that's important to note about the Vikings is they don't actually stay in most of the places that they raid. So the only stable encampment of Vikings in Western Europe is actually here in Normandy. Yes, and indeed the Normans, who later take over England, descend from those Vikings. But again, it's another conversation. The blue, actually, I've cut off the bottom of the map here, is Islamic raiders from North Africa. And so what I want you to see from this is not, oh, there's a lot of colors, but to say lots and lots and lots of external pressure on the Carolingian Empire, as well as that internal pressure amongst the 3 brothers. And so it should probably not surprise you that we start to see a movement of the Saxon people to reclaim parts of what was the Frankish kingdom. Part of this is proximity. Part of this is deep, deep, deep traumatic memory. One of Charlemagne's most impressive / horrifying activities is a capture and defeat of the Saxons. Over the course of several years, thousands of Saxons die, having been put to the sword if they refuse to convert to Christianity. So Saxony up here is where we start to see the movement of a new dynasty, the Ottonians, who end up taking over much of what had been the Frankish kingdom. So this is 771.
Question?
Yes, sir.
It's interesting that the Turks on that last slide are further north and east than modern day Turkey.
Absolutely, yes. Yep, because modern day Turkey is still Byzantine, is still Byzantium, right? And so we do get a lot of Greek kind of political, theological, philosophical identity in modern day Turkey, as much as we get this movement of the Turkish people as well. Absolutely.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the Muslims are kind of in the south. Where are the Jews?
This is a great question. They are all over. They are all over. There are many, 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 many Western European Jews at this time. And in fact, Western European Jews are some of the first victims of the First Crusade before they manage even to get to Asia Minor. So they are everywhere, and they are minoritized everywhere that they are present. They will be the objects of the Fourth Crusade, the Inquisition. It's an excellent question. Everywhere and nowhere is the answer to that question, unfortunately.
Were there Kurds yet? Okay.
And I'll also point out, too, you'll see the Abbasid Caliphate has taken over modern-day Egypt, Saudi Arabia, North Africa. But the Umayyads remain, the previous caliphate that used to control all of this territory, remain in Spain. And so we see in Spain, more than many other places, a unique relationship between Muslims, Christians, and Jews. By virtue of the fact that the Umayyads who rule are the minority religious presence in the Iberian Peninsula. So we'll see spaces that are used both by Muslims and by Jews for worship. And it's a delicate balance between Muslim leadership and also Muslim benevolence towards minority religions in that area. And it's my little sister is there now, and I am having her take pictures of all the things because I've never been to southern Spain. But our story today, unfortunately, is primarily about, or fortunately, about the Saxons. So I want you to keep an eyeball on the Saxons there. This is 771. And then we move to 923, we'll see there is now a whole kingdom of Germany. And that kingdom of Germany is encroaching on the kingdom of France, the kingdom of Italy. You'll also note we have lots of kingdoms here that are starting to resemble our contemporary nation states, right? We'll see Germany, we'll see Italy, we'll see Lyon, we'll see Russia, Sweden, Norway. These are all identifiable contemporary countries. And this is 923. So a lot of the narratives around Christian nationalism and national identity are born in this time period. And one of those stories centers around our friends, the Germans, which in about 100 years managed to take over pretty much a giant chunk of Western Europe. And we'll see all these smaller nation states appearing in modern-day Russia and even in North Africa. It gets, and we start to get too excited about Italy. We don't have time for this. So the origins of that story of the German Empire can be found in Henry the Fowler, so named because he liked to hunt birds a lot. I would prefer the hammer if I was going to have a historical name. But Henry Fowler is a local duke who managed to consolidate power amongst his fellow local lords and dukes. He is, according to the story, elected by his fellow dukes to be the new king of Germany in 919, and he's able to consolidate a lot of authority, much like King Alfred of Wessex, who tends to take over all of Britain because the Vikings knocked everybody else above him. Same thing happens for Henry the Fowler. He consolidates authority because the vast majority of the other Frankish nobles had been eliminated by the Vikings or the Magyars, and he had a noble identity. It is Henry Fowler to whom the Nazis will look for the origin of their identity. And Heinrich Himmler, who is pictured here putting a wreath on the grave of Henry Fowler, lifts up Hitler as the heir to the Ottonian authority. That happens 1,000 years after Henry was elected and his son Otto was put on the throne. So the Nazi rhetoric sees itself as the Third Reich. This is the First Reich, the Ottonians.
Not only Christian, but white supremacy?
Yes, absolutely. And it's ironic because the Nazis were very anti-Christianity, right? They have to completely eliminate all the Christian parts of this story, and there's so many of them. They completely redesigned Bogue, which is the cathedral here. It's a whole other story. Come back, we'll talk about that in another class. What's amazing about the Ottonians is that in this about 150-year slice of history, nowhere else in Western Europe do women have such widespread and impactful authority. And a lot of that is because the leaders, the male leaders, are married to incredibly powerful, well-trained, very, very smart, very, very educated women. And Otto the Great is the son of Henry Fowler. He is married to Edith, the daughter of King Edward of England. He has a number of military victories, and he is the first to be crowned the Holy Roman Emperor. So really, it's the Ottonians who take on that Franco-Papal alliance rather than the Carolingians to really hone in on what does it mean to be the divine right of kings. Well, now I'm not just the king. I am the Holy Roman Emperor. And he's crowned in 962. And to give you a sense of, yes, sir.
If he's married to Edith?
Yes.
How does he marry into the leadership of Italy and Burgundy?
Ooh, very, very convenient. Edith dies. Yes, and he marries Adelheid to enter into that Franco-Papal alliance again. Yes, it is still appropriate for men to have more than one wife at this time, but she dies, which is very convenient. I don't think there's any foul play, by the way. I'm just saying it's convenient for his narrative. And you can see how Otto expands authority all the way down into modern-day Italy. Each of these circles with the crosses on them are significant monastic institutions. The Ottonians pick up the way the Merovingians had led their political authority, which was by having an itinerant kingship. So instead of having a stable capital, they move from place to place to place. This means the places they visit have a great deal of political and, in many cases, religious authority. Many of these places they visit are not just male monastic houses or cathedrals, they're female monastic houses. And one of those monastic houses that's extremely important to us is Gandersheim, and as well as Quedlinburg, which is right here. One of the things that's significant about the female monastic houses in particular is that they're the ones who celebrate the history of the Ottonian family as part of their liturgy. So they're kind of these time capsules, in addition to being led by women who are actually related to the Ottonian rulers. Many princesses are put into monastic houses until they get married or become leaders of those monastic houses. They have their own military might. Each monastic house has its own standing army. They mint coins with their abbesses on them. They're more autonomous princedoms, really, than convents. So when you think of female monastic houses at this time, they are the equivalent to what Henry Fowler had as the leader of his duchy. This is a group of women, and specifically abbesses, who are essentially operating as political units in Ottonian Saxony at this time. And it's also important to name the degree to which the women of the Ottonian household actually ended up doing a lot of ruling. So Adelheid is married to Otto the Great. As we saw, her son becomes Otto II, and they import a princess from Byzantium to marry Otto II named Theophanu, who is brilliant and amazing. And when Otto II dies, Otto III is just a teenager. And so, instead of having Otto III rule, Theophanu and Adelheid rule as regents for him. Theophanu, we know for a fact, issues military orders as well as legal ones during her time as, consort? No. What's the word for somebody who rules on behalf of somebody else? I know this word. It's
Regent?
Thank you. I was like, I know this word, regent. Thank you. So, but you can also see that the Ottonian family, Henry I, Otto, is relatively short-lived. It's only about 100 years. And it's during this time period that we see a huge flourishing, much like we see in the Carolingians, of metalwork, of arts, of theological and liturgical and literary outpourings. This, I hope you notice over here, is Matilda. Matilda. She is the abbess of Quedlinburg, and she gets her own processional cross, and this is Otto Dukes, her brother, sort of on equal playing fields visually in this processional cross. We also see a number of other really interesting processional crosses. We've got our evangelists depicted on each point of the cross, and the Agnus Dei, Christ, on the center. How would you describe this crucifixion compared to other crucifixions that you've seen?
It's feminine.
Say more. Who said feminine?
It's feminine.
Feminine. Ah, yes. Say more.
I mean, it looks like a woman.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Narrow, dainty.
The
And it
cross
makes-
has been pretty elaborate.
Mm-hmm.
It's gilded and jeweled, which is not the original.
Nope, it's really not. Really not. This is also one of the first times we see in the West life-size crucifixes, which have been happening in Byzantium for quite some time. And most of these crucifixes are actually made out of wood. And it's one of the first times we also see in monumental art, by monumental we mean, not personal, designed to be seen in a group. It's one of the first times we see a dead Jesus on the cross. Most of the Carolingian crucifixion iconography is extremely triumphant. Jesus' eyes are very open. His arms are not bent at all. He has triumphed over death. And now, perhaps as a result of Theophano, perhaps as a result of more conversation between Byzantium and the Ottonians, we start to see notably deceased Christ on the cross. You can tell there are cords of the muscles on his arm. He's slumping, his belly is slumped out. You can tell the tension. And perhaps most importantly, eyes are closed in both. So this is a unique moment for artwork, for theology, for literature. It's a unique moment for women in particular, and perhaps the most impressive of these women is my girl, Hrotsvit of Gandasheim. And I do have her here with Amy and Tina because I like to think of her more than anything as a comedian. She has a number of works that are still extant, 8 hagiographic legends, so 8 saints' lives, 2 epic poems, one of which details the history of the Ottonian family, and one of which depicts the history of Gandasheim, her monastic community, and 6 plays. That is shocking, right? We are talking about the 960s, and we have a woman whose literary output has not only been requested by the Ottonian emperors, but may actually be a part of the Ottonians creating their own sense of identity. Because one of these epic poems details the history of the Ottonians. It's at the request of Otto II himself that this is written. And I don't have that one for you to read, but it lifts up the women in that lineage really, really intentionally, and I find that amazing. She calls herself Clamor Validus Gandasamensis, which means the strong voice of Gandasheim. She is a Saxon, and she is emblematic of the kind of intellectual prowess that women in Autonia monastic communities had. She'll tell us a little bit about this, and I'll show you in a second, but Gandersheim, as I've said, was a school, was a hospital, it had a library, it was a political center, it was a site of pilgrimage. It is equally significant that this monastic community was equally significant as other duchies or other small kingdoms. It was its own little nation state inside of Germany. This is the single extant manuscript of Hrotsvit's work. And I'm going to repeat that. This is the only copy we have of any of Hrotsvit's writing. Imagine if we did not have that one, right? And on the flip side, imagine how many texts we don't have that may be in the same vein. This is a manuscript that's currently in the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek in Munich. It is one manuscript that has all of her works in it. This is the first the first Saint's Life about Mary. It says Unica Spes Mundi Dominatrix Inclita Caeli, which is the one hope of the world, queen unmatched of the sky. And that is the story of Mary, mother of Jesus, and some of the pseudo-gospel texts that talk about Mary's life before she has Jesus, that match in many ways some of the things that Jesus says. So Mary is presented at the temple in the same way that Jesus is presented at the temple. It's a fascinating story, and it's not insignificant that this happens at the very beginning of her text. So, one text. We also know that there was a scriptorium at Gandersheim, which is a place where people will write out these manuscripts, and it was staffed by fellow nuns. So the theory is that this particular text was not just composed in the 960s, but that it was written down at Gandersheim by her fellow nuns. It's highly likely, as happened in many monastic houses, that these saints' lives were read out loud during mealtimes. It's entirely possible that the plays were performed as a part of the itinerant court's movements. We don't know for a fact, because there's only one of them. And how did this not get passed on is the other question, right? There are 3 fragments that we see of this life of Mary in other texts, but other than that, this is all we have. Imagine what a gaping hole we would have in the understanding of Ottonian women if we did not have this story of Hrotsvit. And in addition to just being an amazing literary achievement, this also tells us a lot about Gandersheim and the way that women engaged each other as a part of their educational process. This is at the very beginning of her text. She says, "This little volume, with only a little polish, always humble, I offer for the criticism of those kind and learned minds who will not laugh at my faults, but will instead correct them. Unknown and secretly I worked. Occasionally I composed with great effort and then subsequently destroyed what I had written badly. This writing was inspired by the writings which I have encountered at our monastery of Gandersheim, first through the guidance of our learned teacher Ricardus, and then through the gracious consideration of the royal Gerberga. She is most advanced in learning, and she kindly instructed me in those authors whom she herself studied." So what we see here is a community of women dedicated to education and learning. And this is my favorite quote in the entirety of her texts. And this is where she describes what it means to learn academically. She says, "I am sure that the small talent of ability given to me by heaven should not lie idle in the dark recesses of the mind and thus be destroyed by the rust of neglect. Instead, I submitted it to the mallet of ready devotion, so that it may ring out with some small song of divine praise, and thus transformed into an instrument of value." So the intellect here is a gift from God that all women are endowed with, men too, but we're talking about women here specifically. And instead of letting your mind get rusty with neglect, you have to subject it to the mallet of ready devotion so that it rings out like a bell with a song of divine praise, and therefore is transformed into an instrument of value. I like to think that many of the Gandesheim women used Kreutzfeldt's text as a part of their educational processes, and it's clear she had the Gandesheim women as a primary audience for everything that she wrote. So it won't surprise you that one of the saints' lives that she features prominently is the life of St. Agnes, which follows very, very closely on the life of Thecla. It's another virginal woman who is, someone tries to marry her, she rejects that marriage, and this is the way she describes that. The Virgin of Christ, Agnes, rejected the gifts as worthless, that is the absolute correct translation of stercora, for the record. Immediately refusing the weight of offer gold, said, "O son of perpetual death," this is the guy that wants to marry her, "deservedly damned, kindling of crime, despiser of the Almighty God, go back, get away from me quickly. You should not believe that you are able to pervert my heart, which the sweet love of a more noble lover anticipates, whose beautiful sign of faith I carry at the top of my forehead and in my entire body, by which he designated me, by which he binds me wholly to himself." It's intense, right? I love it. So this should remind you of Thecla. This should remind you of Radigan. This should remind you of all these women saints, and Bridget, whose virginity was the symbol of their devotion to God. And this is a community of monastic women, written by a woman. And it is deeply theologically, and it's so precise. I get excited when I talk about Kreutzfeldt. Okay, so this is Kreutzfeldt in the Agnes play, this sort of side note on the incarnation. Just a side note. "He whom the all-powerful Father begot, equal in deity and not less in majesty, without a mother before the time of the ancient world. He through whom God begat the world for himself. A mother bore the same one without a father, giving milk to her own creator, born in time." Does that give you chills? It gives me chills. And again, the emphasis on Mary, right? None of this is new theology, but the way she turns it is always to emphasize the role of women, both historically and biblically. She is also one of the first authors to engage in some profoundly Islamophobic rhetoric. One of her saints' lives is the story of Pelagius, who is a male virgin who is martyred after resisting the advances of an Umayyad caliph in Cordoba named Abd al-Rahman III. And so we see here both a caricature of Islam, a caricature of queer identity, and sort of melding those two things as being non-Christian and non-Frankish. It is explicitly anti-Muslim, and we believe that this story got to Kreutzfeldt through a man who's been traveling through Spain and visited Gandesheim, which tells us again how cosmopolitan Gandesheim is. We're getting stories from what's happening over in Cordoba, which is a significant distance from Gandesheim. It tells us kind of what a power player Gandesheim was in geopolitics at that time. The way she frames it, though, is to mirror the Agnes story, where Pelagius is, and Agnes is a Roman woman who is being persecuted for her Christian identity in the same way that we saw Thecla and Radigan being persecuted for their Christian identities. Pelagius she lifts up as a contemporary martyr who, like the Roman women, is now a contemporary Christian man whose body is imperiled by a political other who is intent upon sexually molesting him. So we see these parallels. We've got Agnes on one side, Pelagius on one side, a Roman governor on one side, a Muslim caliph on the other. And the idea here is that this contemporary battle between Christianity and Islam is the same battle between Christianity and the state of Rome. So it's a pan-historical narrative that invites contemporary Christians to see themselves as a part of this long battle. And it's complicated, and I don't love it. And this may be, according to some queer theorists, the first time we see explicit denunciation of homosexuality in early church writings as well. And we need to hold all of that in tension with some of the other amazing things that Kreutzwig did. And so, Alan, if you want to hand out our play, we're going to do a little reading of one of the plays that she wrote, which is amazing. It's called The Passion of the Holy Maidens, and it's basically 3 Roman women in the persecution of Diocletian being pursued, not surprisingly, for marriage or sexual something by a Roman general. And it is this text and all the other texts, the primary source texts that we've been reading, are available on the Foundry website. Highly recommend that you read it. Check that out. And I'm going to need some volunteers who are going to come up here and be a part of the play. So the first scene includes Diocletian, and I will be Diocletian, and I need an Agape, a Chionia, and an Irene. Okay, come on up. You're going to be Agape. You want to be a Chionia? I need one more to be Irene. Kristen, you want to be Irene? All right, come on down. We will cluster around this particular microphone here so we can all right, so I'm going to read you the story, the beginning, and we will move on from here. So, the Passion of the Holy Maidens, Agape, Chionia, and Irene. In the silence of the night, the provincial governor Dulcitius came to them stealthily, lusting to gratify himself in their arms. But the moment he went in, his mind snaps. He embraced and kissed his cooking pots and skillets instead. He thought they were the virgins. His faith and clothes grew repulsively filthy with black soot, and afterwards he sent the young women to the magistrate Sicinius for punishment. Sicinius himself was also remarkably deluded, but he at last ordered Agape and Chionia to be burned and Irene shot with an arrow. So we're on page 199, and here we will begin. Because of your illustrious rank and background and your radiant loveliness, you are going to be joined in marriage to the leading officers of the palace. This is to take place at my command, if you willingly deny Christ and sacrifice to our gods.
Don't bother, and don't concern yourself about preparing us a wedding. Nothing can force us to deny our avowed faith in his holy name or to soil our virginity.
What has got a hold of you? What foolishness drives the 3 of you?
Do you see any sign of foolishness in us?
Most obviously.
In what way?
Mainly this: you abandoned the worship of our established cult, and you chased after the futile novelty of Christian superstition.
You dare to malign the glory of the all-powerful God. That is a danger.
Danger? To whom?
To you and the state you govern.
This girl is a lunatic. Take her away.
Well,
my sister is not a lunatic. She's criticizing your stupidity.
This one's an even crazier maniac. Get her out of my sight as well. Let's question the 3rd.
You'll find the 3rd one rebellious and completely unyielding.
Irene, even though you're younger in years, show that you're more mature, more honorable.
Show me how, I ask you. In what way?
Bend your neck to the gods. Be an example of good behavior to your sisters and set them free.
Let those cower before idols who want to provoke the wrath of God on high. My head is anointed with the urgent of a king. I will not dishonor it by groveling at the feet of statues.
To worship the gods brings no dishonor. In fact, it is the highest honor.
And what dishonor could be more shameful, and what could be a greater disgrace than to revere a slave as if he were a lord?
I am not urging you to revere a slave, but the gods of lords and princes.
Isn't a person anybody's slave if he can be bought for a price from a craftsman, like something up for sale?
The insolence of her jabbering will be crushed with torture.
This is what we want. It's what we welcome with open arms, to be mangled with tortures from Christ, for Christ's love.
Is anyone hearing Radigan there? The desire to be mangled. Okay, tie them up in chains, these insubordinate girls. They're contesting our orders. They'll be brought to trial before the governor Dulcitius. They can serve their time in a dirty jail cell while they wait. Excellent. Thanks, ladies. Would someone like to be a soldier? we're going to volunteer someone in the first row who's married to a high school teacher who's looking away from me. Come on down. Welcome, welcome.
Did the people at that time think this was funny?
Yes. Do you think it's funny? Not yet? Okay, yes. Yes, it's supposed to be a comedy. It's supposed to be a comedy. And it gets funnier. Okay.
The word unguent is then.
Ungent. Yes, that's the oil that you're being, yeah. Okay. Soldiers, bring the prisoners forward.
Here they are, the girls you called for.
Spectacular. Aren't they beautiful? Lovely. What gorgeous little girls.
They're perfectly dazzling.
I'm seized by their looks.
We can see why.
I have to make them want me, love me.
We don't think you'll have any luck.
Rude. Why not?
Because they're firm in their religion.
What if I enticed them with sweet favors?
They look down on that.
What if I frightened them with tortures?
They'll consider that insignificant.
So what can I do?
Give it some thought.
Put the girls in custody, in the pantry, the place inside the hallway where they store the household servants' pots,
Why there?
so I can visit them as often as I want.
As you say.
Okay, you have to stay up here, sorry.
More so.
Okay, what are our women prisoners doing at this time of the night?
They're singing hymns.
Let's get closer.
We can hear the sound of their bell-like voices from a long way off.
Watch by the foyer with a torch. I'm going inside. I hope to taste my fill of those embraces I've been yearning for.
Go on in. We'll stand guard.
Okay. Agape, you want to come back up? Yeah, Agape, Keone and Irene, sorry, you tagged in for the whole thing. You didn't even know that.
What was that noise in the foyer?
That miserable Diocletius is on his way.
God preserve us.
Amen.
Why is he crashing around with the cooking pots and casseroles and frying pans?
I'll see. Come, I'll tell you. Look through the crack.
What's happening?
Look at that idiot. He's wholly out of his senses. He imagines he's got his arms around
What's
us.
he doing?
Now he's fondling the pot in his lap. Now he's hugging the skillet and the casserole. He's nibbling them with juicy kisses.
It's ludicrous.
His face and hands and clothes are getting all grimy. He's growing filthy from the soot that's sticking to him. He looks like an Ethiopian.
It fits. His body should look the way his mind is, since the devil has possessed him.
Look, he's getting ready to go. Let's see how his soldiers react when they see him outside the door.
Ready? Mm-hmm. Who's that coming out? Somebody possessed by fiends? Or it could be the devil himself. Let's get out of here.
Men! Why are you running away? Hold it! Wait for me! Bring the torch to light my way home!
It sounds like the chief's voice, but it's got the shape of the devil. Let's not stick around. Let's go. That phantom wants to do us in.
I'm on my way to the palace. The bad treatment I've had to suffer, I'm going to reveal it to the authorities. All right. Okay, wait. Do you want to play my wife?
Sure.
No, I want you to play my wife. We're going to go down here to scene 5. Okay.
So I'm wife?
You're my wife. Yes, I'm Dulcitius. Carry on.
What about scene 6?
We're skipping it.
Oh, we're skipping it.
We're skipping it, yeah.
Okay. So, okay, here we go. Oh no, my husband, Dulcitius. What? Dulcitius?
Dulcitius.
Yes, that. What have you been through? You're not in your right mind. The Christians have made a dunce out of you.
Now I get it. Their magic has put an evil spell on me.
Oh, this is what upsets me so terribly. What especially disheartens me, that you don't even know what you've endured.
I demand that those licentious girls be brought here immediately, that they be publicly exposed and stripped of their clothes. We'll turn the tables on them. Let them know how it feels to be a butt of public ridicule. Awesome.
Now soldiers.
Yes. You go ahead.
Soldiers. Wife.
Soldiers. Yeah, you're going to be all the roles.
We're sweating for nothing. We're working with no results. Look, their clothes stick to their virgin bodies like skin. And him, the one who gave us the orders to strip them, he's snoring in his chair. We can't even shake him out of his sleep. Let's go report this to the emperor.
It grieves me very much to hear about the abuse Governor Dulcitius has been exposed to, that he's been so insulted and reproached to such an extent. These despicable little females are not going to get away with bragging about the way they've made a mockery of our gods and those who worship them. I'll direct Magistrate Sicinius to carry our revenge into effect. All right, who wants to be Sicinius? Yeah, you're done with it. You're done. Any other gentle folk? All right, Alan, come on down. You can be Sicinius. I'll be your soldiers.
Soldiers, ho! Where are those lascivious girls? They've got to be twisted on the rack. Yes, those girls.
They're pining in jail.
Keep Irene there and bring the others.
Why are you leaving her behind?
Soldiers?
Oh, I'm sparing her you.
Okay.
Huh? 205?
Oh, whoops, I'm on the wrong.
Flip one more.
Flip. I'm sparing her youth. She might be easier to convert if she's not coerced by her sister's presence.
Very good. All right, Agape, come on back up. All right. They're right here, these women you sent for. You're Sicinius, yep.
Agree to submit Agape and Keonia to what I recommend.
If we agree.
Pour libations to the gods.
To the true and eternal Father, and to his co-eternal Son, and also to the Holy Paraclete, we do make a perpetual offering of the sacrifice of praise.
That is not what I urge you to do. That is what I forbid on pain of chastisement.
You shall not forbid it, nor will we ever sacrifice to demons.
Put aside this hard-heartedness. Perform the sacrifice. Otherwise, I will have you put to death in accordance with the rule of the Emperor Diocletian.
It's fitting then that you bow to the emperor's orders, which you know we despise, and put us to death. If you delay and spare us, you might yourself be lawfully executed.
Don't just stand. Oh, that's you. You're Sicinius, I'm the soldier, sorry.
Oh, okay. Don't stand there, soldiers. Don't just stand there. Grab these blaspheming women and fling them into the fire. Alive.
Right away! We'll build up the pyre and deliver them to the roaring flames. That will finally put an end to their tirade.
Nothing, O Lord, is impossible for your awful power. Even the fire forgets the force of its nature in obedience to you. But we are weary of waiting, Lord, and pray you to loosen the tether of our lives. Once our bodies have perished, our souls may clasp hands with you in heaven.
Okay, this is weird. It's an astonishing miracle. Look, the life is gone from their bodies, but not a bit of disfigurement can be found. Their hair, their clothes, they haven't been burned in the fire, and their bodies aren't touched.
Bring Irene.
And scene. Thank you all so much. No, we're gonna call it there. Okay, so what did you notice there in that last scene that reminded you of the passions we've read before? Thecla, Perpetua.
They just keep at it.
They just keep at it. Not going to be bent. Not going to be tamed. Yep. Yes, they want to be martyred, right? That's the thread that we have to contend with, both with Radegund, who was doing the intensity of her self-mortification because she couldn't be martyred. What is that thread in Christian history that pushes sacrifice to a problematic point? So on that note, I will leave you. Please go tell everyone you know about Kreutzfeld, who is amazing. And next week we will end with Hildegard von Bingen, who many of you have heard. We'll hear some music of hers next week. So thank you all so much. And can we give our actors a hand? They did such a good job.